Hi, this is Jim Linnell. You know, I've been doing leatherwork for over 50 years now, and I've been teaching classes all over the place on behalf of Elk Track Studio. And of all of the classes that I've ever taught, there are none that are more important than what I'm going to show you right now. And that is, how do you get started in leatherwork? There are some basic techniques, some things that you need to learn, and if you learn those correctly, they will make a huge difference on how much enjoyment you get out of your leatherwork. So stay with me as I walk you through doing a pattern just like this, which will teach you how to use all of the most basic leatherworking tools. The first thing we need to do when we get ready to start a design is we need obviously a piece of leather to work on. The leather we work on when we're carving designs into leather is vegetable tan leather, and I have here a piece of vegetable tan leather. It's a little bit lighter than what somebody might start out with. It's about a 4 or 5 ounce. I've glued a piece of cardboard to the back of it just so that it keeps it stable here. But vegetable tan leather is tanned such that when we apply moisture to the surface of it, it will absorb that moisture. It kind of opens up the pores of the leather, and this then becomes the first step in preparing this leather for carving. We have to get it cased, and that's kind of the technical term for this. We will dampen it down, and when I do this initial wetting, I try to dampen it down so that the moisture gets maybe halfway through that piece of leather. So it looks like I'm just putting a lot of water on here, but the goal here isn't to soak it all the way through, but just to make sure that it gets penetrated down into the inner fibers of this piece of leather. And then we're ready to then put an outline of the design on the piece of leather. And I've got here an outline that I drew up that gives me the basic lines that I need to have, and I've transferred that onto some vellum so that I can lay that over my pattern or over my piece of leather and kind of make sure I've got it centered and so forth. So the very first thing I'm going to do once I get it where I want it is I'm going to take a little piece of tape here and I'm going to tack it down just so that it doesn't move while I start this tracing. One of the things that you'll want to do is make sure you got good clean lines to follow and such. So just making sure once you start this you don't have it scoot around on you is kind of an important thing. And then I'm going to use a stylus to trace this design on the leather. A stylus is just a pointed object. Sometimes they'll come with a little ball on the end of them, but they're usually polished up pretty good. And the idea here is to take this tool and trace along those lines with a little bit of pressure, and that'll leave an indentation in the leather, and that's kind of what we need to get started. And when you do a design, you'll want to make sure you're real thorough that you get all of these lines traced onto the leather so that you've got everything there to follow. And so take your time with this. When you are getting started, these kinds of designs usually are what will come in an instruction book, and there are lots of good instruction books out there that have great patterns for you to follow that will show you and let you do a design that uses all of the basic leatherworking tools. So you don't have to necessarily draw one up from scratch, I guess is what I'm saying. You don't worry about that. There's designs to follow, and what you really need is this basic outline. They make a lot of other great guides to help you in the early stages. There are plastic templates that they have with the designs raised on one side of that plastic, and those the Tandy Leather sells one called Craft Aids. Maker's Leather Supply sells one called Pattern Rubs. But the basic idea with those is that they will give you an outline of the design and raised on a piece of plastic, and when you rub over that, it will imprint that same sort of an outline onto your leather, and that's where you have to start. One of the things about this design that I am doing here today is that it utilizes all of the basic stamping tools. Sometimes people will look at a leather catalog or or a supply catalog, and they will just be overwhelmed with all of the selection of tools and equipment that's available, and just might even be scared to death at how much all of that might cost if they were to buy all of it. But I want you to first of all know that it doesn't take all of that to be able to do leatherwork. I'm going to do this design today with just 6 of those basic stamping tools. And believe it or not, if you know how to use these 6 tools, well, 7 when you count the swivel knife, but when you learn to use those tools and learn the technique of using them, you're pretty well ready to use any of those tools that you see in those leather catalogs. Leatherwork really is broken down to that basic. I can take the basic stamping tools that I'm going to carve this design with, and I can carve a saddle, I can carve projects of any size. You're not limited about how big or what kind of leatherwork you can do based on the number of tools you have. What limits you is your knowledge on how to use those tools. And so that's what this little instruction is about, is to show you those most important things that you need to know about using the basic tools, because again, once you have that down, you really are ready to do a whole lot of leatherwork. And unfortunately, in this day and age, well, not unfortunately, it's one of the great things about this day and age, but there are lots of good resources available on the internet. And the problem, though, for somebody that's first starting out is you don't know if the person that's teaching you really knows what they're doing or whether they don't. So let me tell you about me. My name's Jim Linnell, and I've been doing leatherwork for an awful long time. I started over 50 years ago doing a design very similar to this right here, learning how to use those basic tools. And then I have had the privilege of just working at it for all of those years. And leatherwork hasn't changed over those years. Those things that I learned in that very first class are still some of those basic techniques that need to be learned. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today, is the things I think are the most important for you to know.